I never thought I'd be telling this story, but here I am 3 months later, still trying to wrap my head around what happened. My name is Sarah and I'm 32 years old. I've been married to my husband Jake for 7 years now, and we have 2 beautiful kids, Emma, who's 5, and little Tommy, who just turned 3. We thought we had our life figured out, you know? We had our dream homes, stable jobs, and what seemed like a supportive extended family. But sometimes, the people closest to you can turn your entire world upside down in ways you never saw coming. It all started 2 years ago when Jake's mother, Patricia, moved in with us. She was 68 at the time, recently widowed after Jake's father passed away from a sudden heart attack. Patricia seemed devastated, lost, and frankly we felt terrible for her. She had been married for 45 years, and suddenly she was alone in that big house where she and Frank had raised their 3 children. When she asked if she could stay with us, just temporarily, while she figured out her next steps, Jake and I didn't hesitate to say yes. Patricia had always been a bit controlling, if I'm being honest. She had very specific ideas about how things should be done, from the way I folded laundry to how I disciplined the children. But grief changes people, right? We figured she was just processing her loss in her own way, and having her grandchildren around would help her heal. Jake, being the devoted son he is, wanted to do everything possible to support his mother during such a difficult time. The arrangement seemed to work well initially. Patricia helped with the kids, she cooked dinner most nights, and she even contributed a small amount toward groceries from her Social Security check. She had her own room upstairs, and we converted Jake's old home office into a small sitting area where she could watch her shows and have some privacy. The kids loved having grandma around all the time, and I have to admit having an extra pair of hands was helpful, especially when Jake had to travel for work. But as weeks turned into months, I started noticing small changes in Patricia's behavior. She became increasingly interested in our finances, asking detailed questions about our mortgage payments, utility bills, and even our income. At first I thought she was just trying to be helpful, maybe offering to contribute more to the household expenses. Jake explained that his mother had always been very money conscious. It's how she and Frank managed to raise 3 kids on a modest income and still save enough for a comfortable retirement. What I didn't realize was that Patricia was gathering information for a plan that would ultimately devastate our family. She was studying our financial situation, learning about our vulnerabilities, and positioning herself for something that none of us could have imagined. The woman we thought we were helping was actually preparing to help herself to everything we had worked so hard to build. Looking back now, there were so many red flags that I wish I had paid attention to. The way she started receiving more and more mail at our address. How she began insisting on handling certain household tasks that involved paperwork. The mysterious phone calls she would take in her room with the door closed. But we trusted her completely. She was family. She was Jake's mother, the grandmother of our children. How could we have known that the person we welcomed into our home with open arms was planning to take everything from us? About 6 months after Patricia moved in, things started getting complicated. She began talking about making our living arrangement more official and beneficial for everyone involved. At the time, I thought she meant she wanted to contribute more financially to the household, which honestly would have been welcome. Jake had recently taken a pay cut at his job due to company restructuring, and I was working part-time so I could be home with the kids more. Money was tighter than we liked to admit, even to each other. Patricia suggested that since she was planning to stay with us long-term, maybe permanently, it would make sense to put her name on some of our accounts and paperwork. She argued that this would give her legal standing to help with household decisions and emergencies, especially if something happened to Jake or me. She painted it as a practical safety measure, a way to ensure the kids would be taken care of and the household could continue running smoothly no matter what life threw at us. Jake was immediately on board with the idea. His mother had always been the financial backbone of his childhood home, handling budgets, bills, and major decisions with impressive competence. He trusted her judgment implicitly and saw her involvement in our finances as a blessing rather than a potential problem. When I expressed some hesitation about adding her to our accounts, Jake reminded me of how much she had helped us already and how much sense it made to have her more involved, especially given her experience managing money. The process started small. First, Patricia asked to be added as an authorized user on one of our credit cards, claiming it would be easier for her to buy groceries and household supplies without having to ask us for money constantly. Then she suggested being added to our utility accounts so she could handle the bills and potentially negotiate better rates. She claimed, learned some tricks over the years for dealing with service companies. Each request seemed reasonable on its own, and each time, Jake advocated for trusting his mother's experience and good intentions. But Patricia was just getting started. She began talking about the tax advantages of having multiple names on various accounts, claiming that her fixed income from Social Security and her late husband's pension could be leveraged to help our family financially. She spoke knowledgeably about estate planning, joint accounts, and financial strategies that honestly went over my head. Jake was impressed by his mother's apparent expertise, and I'll admit, some of her ideas did sound like they could benefit our family. The real turning point came when Patricia suggested that adding her name to our mortgage could significantly improve our financial situation. She explained that her excellent credit score and long credit history could potentially help us refinance at a better rate, saving us hundreds of dollars per month. She also mentioned that having her as a co-signer would give us access to better loan products and might even allow us to access some of the equity we had built up in the house for home improvements or debt consolidation. I remember the exact moment Jake and I sat down with Patricia to discuss this idea seriously. It was a Tuesday evening in October and the kids were already in bed. Patricia had prepared a detailed presentation with printouts from various financial websites, comparison charts of interest rates, and calculations showing how much money we could save. She had clearly done her homework and her arguments were compelling. Jake was completely convinced, and even I had to admit that the potential savings were significant. What we didn't understand was that Patricia wasn't just trying to help us save money on our mortgage. She was positioning herself to take control of our most valuable asset. Every document we signed, every account we added her name to, every financial decision we included her in was another step in her carefully orchestrated plan. We thought we were gaining a financial partner and advisor. In reality, we were handing over the keys to our entire financial life to someone who had very different intentions than we realized. The mortgage refinancing process took about 2 months to complete, and during that time, Patricia was incredibly helpful and involved. She attended meetings with our loan officer, provided additional documentation, and even negotiated some of the terms more aggressively than Jake or I would have been comfortable doing on our own. When we finally closed on the new loan, we were saving almost $400 per month compared to our previous mortgage payment. Patricia had delivered on her promise, and Jake was practically glowing with pride about his mother's financial acumen. But that success gave Patricia even more credibility and influence in our household financial decisions. Over the next few months, she gradually took over more and more of our bill paying and account management. She argued that since she was home all day anyway, it made sense for her to handle these tasks, freeing up Jake and me to focus on work and the kids. She set up online access to all our accounts, had statements sent to her email address for easier organization, and even started handling communications with our insurance companies and service providers. I started feeling uncomfortable with how much control Patricia had gained over our finances, but every time I brought up my concerns with Jake, he reminded me of how much money she had saved us and how much stress she had taken off our plates. He pointed out that his mother had successfully managed her own household finances for decades and had never given us any reason not to trust her. When I suggested that maybe we should maintain more direct oversight of our own accounts, Jake accused me of being ungrateful and suspicious without cause. The first real warning sign came in January, about 4 months after the refinancing was complete. I noticed that our savings account balance seemed lower than I expected, and when I asked Patricia about it, she explained that she had moved some money around to take advantage of better interest rates and promotional offers from different banks. She showed me paperwork indicating that our money was earning more in these new accounts, and mathematically her explanation made sense. But something felt off about the whole situation, though I couldn't pinpoint exactly what was bothering me. Around the same time, I started receiving calls from service providers asking about missed payments or requesting updated payment information. When I asked Patricia about these calls, she seemed irritated and explained that she had been dealing with billing errors and system glitches that were causing confusion. She assured me that all our bills were being paid on time and that these calls were just the result of poor communication between different departments within these large companies. She even showed me confirmation numbers and email receipts that seemed to support her explanations. But the calls kept coming and they were becoming more frequent and more urgent. Our internet service was temporarily suspended for non-payment, though Patricia quickly resolved the issue and blamed it on an automated system error. Our electricity was nearly shut off before Patricia made what she called an emergency payment, to catch up on what she described as incorrectly processed previous payments. Each incident had a reasonable explanation, but the pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Jake remained firmly in his mother's corner, defending her handling of our finances and dismissing my growing concerns as stress and mistrust. He pointed out that we were still saving money overall, that our mortgage payments were lower than ever, and that any temporary billing issues were minor inconveniences compared to the overall benefits of having Patricia manage our accounts. When I suggested that maybe we should take back direct control of our finances, Jake became defensive and accused me of wanting to hurt his mother's feelings and reject her help after everything she had done for our family. The tension in our house was becoming unbearable. I felt like I was going crazy, questioning my own instincts and wondering if I was being paranoid about Patricia's management of our money. But deep down, I knew something was fundamentally wrong with our financial situation. The problem was, I had no idea how wrong things really were or how much worse they were about to get. Patricia had been playing a much longer game than any of us realized, and we were about to discover just how thoroughly she had outmaneuvered us. Everything came crashing down on a Thursday morning in March. I was getting ready for work when there was a loud knock on our front door. Jake had already left for the office, the kids were eating breakfast, and Patricia was upstairs getting dressed. I opened the door to find two very serious-looking people in business suits who introduced themselves as representatives from our mortgage company. They were there, they explained, because our house was officially in foreclosure proceedings due to non-payment of our mortgage for the past 4 months. I stood there in complete shock, insisting that there had to be some mistake. We had been making our payments through Patricia, and she had assured us that everything was current and up to date. The representatives showed me official documentation indicating that no payments had been received since November, and that all attempts to contact us about the delinquency had been unsuccessful because the phone numbers and email addresses on file had been changed without our knowledge. My hands were shaking as I called Patricia downstairs to explain what was happening. When she saw the mortgage company representatives, her face went completely white, but she quickly composed herself and began explaining that there had been a series of banking errors and communication problems that she had been working to resolve. She claimed that she had been in contact with the mortgage company for weeks trying to sort out these issues, and that she was surprised they had escalated to sending representatives to our home. But the representatives weren't buying Patricia's explanations. They had detailed records showing that the mortgage payments had been redirected to different accounts, that contact information had been changed multiple times, and that someone had been actively avoiding their attempts to resolve the payment issues. When they asked Patricia directly about these discrepancies, she became flustered and started contradicting herself, claiming first that she had been making payments to a different department, then saying that she had been told to hold payments due to a pending modification, then finally admitting that there might have been some confusion about the payment process. After the representatives left, giving us 30 days to bring the account current or face immediate foreclosure proceedings, I sat Patricia down and demanded a complete explanation of what had happened to our mortgage payments. That's when the first pieces of the truth finally came out. Patricia admitted that she had been using our mortgage money to pay off debts that she had accumulated before moving in with us. She claimed that she had intended to pay everything back before we noticed, and that she had been trying to figure out a way to resolve the situation without destroying our family. But as I pressed for more details, the scope of Patricia's deception became clearer and more devastating. She had not only been skipping our mortgage payments, but she had also been manipulating our utility accounts, credit cards, and bank statements to hide the extent of her financial mismanagement. The money she had supposedly moved to higher interest accounts? Gone. The bills she claimed to be paying on time? Most of them were months behind. The savings from our mortgage refinancing? She had been pocketing the difference and using it for her own expenses. Jake came home that evening to find me sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by bank statements, credit card bills, and legal documents, trying to piece together the full extent of the financial damage Patricia had inflicted on our family. When I explained what had happened, he initially refused to believe it, insisting that there had to be some misunderstanding or that his mother was the victim of some kind of financial fraud or identity theft. But as we went through the paperwork together, even Jake couldn't deny the evidence of his mother's systematic theft and deception. The worst part was discovering how methodically Patricia had planned and executed her scheme. She had gradually gained access to our accounts, changed contact information to prevent us from receiving notices, and created fake documentation to support her lies about our financial status. She had been living in our home, eating our food and playing grandmother to our children while simultaneously stealing our financial security and jeopardizing our family's future. The betrayal was so complete and so calculated that it felt almost impossible to comprehend. But we were about to learn that Patricia's theft of our mortgage payments and utility money was just the beginning of her plan. The real shock was still coming, and it would reveal the true depth of her deception and the devastating impact of her actions on our family's future. 3 days after the foreclosure notice, I was going through Patricia's room while she was out grocery shopping, looking for any additional financial documents that might help us understand the full scope of the damage. That's when I found the folder that changed everything. Hidden in her closet behind some old photo albums was a manila envelope containing documents that revealed the most shocking aspect of Patricia's deception. She hadn't just been stealing our money and failing to pay our bills. She had been systematically transferring ownership of our house into her own name. Using her position as a co-signer on our mortgage and her access to our personal information, Patricia had been forging our signatures on property transfer documents, quitclaim deeds and power of attorney forms. Over the course of several months, she had legally maneuvered herself into becoming the primary owner of our home, while making it appear that Jake and I had voluntarily signed over our rights to the property. The documents showed that Patricia had been working with a corrupt attorney who specialized in elder financial abuse cases, except in this case, she was the elder doing the abusing rather than the victim. Together, they had created a paper trail suggesting that Jake and I were financially irresponsible and that Patricia had stepped in to protect the property from foreclosure by taking ownership. The missed mortgage payments weren't just theft. They were part of a deliberate strategy to create a financial crisis that would justify her takeover of our home. But the most devastating discovery was a letter from Patricia to her attorney, dated just 2 weeks earlier, outlining her exit strategy. She had been planning to wait until the foreclosure proceedings forced us out of the house, then sell the property and disappear with the proceeds. The letter estimated that she could clear about $200,000 from the sale after paying off the remaining mortgage balance and the attorney's fees. She had been living in our home, caring for our children and pretending to help our family while planning to steal our house and leave us homeless. When I confronted Patricia with the documents that evening, she didn't even try to deny what she had done. Instead, she became angry and defensive, claiming that Jake and I were too young and financially irresponsible to properly manage such a valuable asset. She argued that she was protecting the property for her grandchildren's future, ensuring that it wouldn't be lost to our poor financial decisions. She actually seemed to believe that her theft was justified, that she had a right to take our home because she was older and more experienced with money. The next morning, Patricia was gone. She had packed her belongings during the night and left without saying goodbye to the children or leaving any information about where she was going. But she didn't just leave, she took everything she could carry that had any value, including jewelry, electronics, and even some of the children's savings bonds that had been gifts from relatives. She also emptied our remaining bank accounts and maxed out our credit cards with cash advances, taking every penny she could access before disappearing. Jake was completely broken by his mother's betrayal. The woman who had raised him, who had taught him about honesty and family values, had systematically destroyed our financial security while living under our roof and caring for our children. The realization that she had been planning this deception for months, that every kind gesture and helpful act had been part of her strategy to gain our trust and access to our assets, was almost too much for him to process. We spent the next several weeks working with attorneys and law enforcement to try to recover our stolen money and reverse the property transfers, but the legal processes were slow and expensive. We managed to stop the foreclosure by proving fraud, but the financial damage was severe. We had to take out loans to catch up on missed bills, our credit was destroyed, and we were facing tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees to try to restore our ownership of our own home. 6 months later, we're still dealing with the aftermath of Patricia's theft. We managed to regain legal ownership of our house, but the financial recovery has been brutal. Jake had to take a second job, I went back to work full-time, and we're living paycheck to paycheck while trying to rebuild our savings and repair our credit. The children ask about grandma sometimes, and we struggle with how to explain that someone they loved and trusted could do something so terrible to our family. Patricia was eventually arrested in another state for attempting a similar scheme against an elderly couple she had befriended, But most of our money was never recovered. The betrayal by someone we loved and trusted has changed our family forever, making us more cautious about who we trust and more protective of our financial information. The most painful part isn't even the money we lost. It's the realization that the person we thought we knew and loved never really existed at all.